The sun rose over the cotton fields like a curse, stretching its cruel light across the endless white rows that shimmered under the heat. In the deep heart of the American South, from South Carolina to Mississippi, this white gold built empires. The cotton, soft and pure to the touch, was the foundation of fortunes so vast that by 1860, Mississippi alone had more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the nation. Yet beneath that glitter of prosperity lay something far darker. For every bale of cotton shipped to northern factories, there were human hands bleeding in the fields, human backs breaking beneath the overseer's whip, and human souls reduced to dust beneath the weight of greed. Each morning began before dawn. The sky would still be ink black, stars faint and fading, when a pistol fired in the distance. It was 4 a.m. On plantations like Woodland in Louisiana, that single gunshot shattered the silence and summoned hundreds of enslaved men and women from restless sleep. They rose, trembling, and stepped into the darkness to begin their work. Solomon Northup, who endured 12 years of slavery, once wrote that the day began with the first dim streak of dawn and ended only when the darkness returned. That was no exaggeration. It was the unrelenting rhythm of life in bondage, a life measured not by hours or heartbeats, but by how much cotton one could pull from the thorned plants before collapsing. The picking itself was an act of endurance, an endless war between flesh and thorn. The bowls were like tiny cages of pain, sharp, rigid, ready to tear through skin. Workers moved fast, both hands flying, pulling the soft white fiber free before the overseer's shout reached them. Their fingers bled through scraps of cloth tied around their palms. Every touch was agony, but stopping meant punishment. Mary Reynolds, who lived long enough to tell her story, said that every handful was a fight, and your hands told the story of every battle. By sunset, their sacks were heavy with the day's harvest, but heavier still with exhaustion and despair. The heat was its own form of punishment. In Mississippi and Georgia, the air turned into something almost alive, thick, wet, impossible to breathe. The sun scorched the skin like fire. Temperatures rose above 100 degrees, yet the overseer's voice stayed cold and sharp. There was no mercy. Bodies fell in the fields, fainting from exhaustion, or dying quietly under the same sky they had worked beneath for years. "Lost 2 to heat today," one Louisiana diary recorded. Production continues. Even death was an afterthought, a note in a ledger, a line of ink instead of a grave. Water, the simplest thing in life, was rationed as if it were gold. Overseers poured it on the ground, just to watch the thirsty stare as it disappeared into the dust. Some plantations placed barrels every quarter-mile so that every sip was a march through the sun. Others forced workers to drink from ditches, the same water shared by insects and disease. Illness spread like wildfire, fever, dysentery, cholera, invisible weapons in the overseer's arsenal. Food was little better. A small scoop of cornmeal, a strip of pork, a spoon of molasses, that was all. Enough to survive the day, but not enough to live. Rations were measured by the cost of keeping someone alive just long enough to work again tomorrow. Hunger gnawed at every rib, hollowed out the strongest men, silenced the cries of children who learned early that crying wasted energy. Disease took what hunger didn't: scurvy, pellagra, slow fevers that ate away the flesh. In the quarters, 20 people crammed into rooms no bigger than a shed, breathing the same heavy air, coughing through the same nights. Cotton dust filled their lungs, and when they coughed, it came out white, but the whip ruled more than the hunger, the thirst, or the heat. It ruled through fear. The crack of leather echoed like thunder across the fields. Each lash was deliberate, counted, recorded. Overseers prided themselves on precision. 2 lashes for every pound below quota, 10 for a word out of place, 50 for the crime of resistance. Salt water was poured into wounds to keep them from healing. On some plantations, whips were designed with knots and wire, crafted to tear skin from bone. Punishment was not chaos. It was control, a science of terror. Some punishments left scars deeper than the body. Runaways had their ears cut or their faces branded with letters of ownership. Iron collars were fastened with spikes that pierced the neck with every movement. Branding irons hissed against flesh, searing a mark that said this one tried to be free. Others wore iron masks that silenced them, heavy cages of metal that turned breathing into torture. On one plantation, a mechanical whipping device was invented to deliver lashes with perfect mechanical precision. Cruelty had evolved into technology. And yet, the cruelest punishment of all was not a lash, but loss. Families were torn apart like paper. Mothers watched their children sold to strangers. Husbands saw wives marched away in chains. Tears were forbidden. Emotion was defiance. Frederick Douglass wrote that the hearth became desolate, and the husband could not weep for the wife he lost. Fear was the overseer's greatest weapon. On some plantations, punishments were random, decided by dice or lottery just to keep terror alive. Every dawn was a question. Would I survive this day or be made into an example? Disease and death were everywhere. Cotton's white dust filled lungs like slow poison, and tiny cuts from the plants turned black with infection. Malaria swept through the South every summer. Yellow fever came in waves, and those who fell ill were left to die. Doctors measured life in terms of profit. One owner wrote, "Cheaper to buy than to heal." That sentence was the perfect summary of a system built on cruelty. And yet, within that horror, people still found ways to care. They whispered knowledge of herbs, kept hidden gardens, healed one another when the white doctor would not. They created songs that carried warnings, stories that carried hope. In a world that tried to destroy their humanity, they found ways to protect it. Women bore the heaviest weight. Pregnant or not, they worked the fields until the very moment of birth. Some gave life between the rows, bit through the cord, wrapped the newborn in their skirt, and went back to work. Half of those babies never saw their first birthday. Still, mothers sang to them in the dark, songs of a freedom neither might ever see. It was in those songs that rebellion lived. Some did run. Through swamps, through forests, through rivers, through darkness. They ran with red pepper in their pockets to throw off the hounds, with hope in their hearts and scars on their backs. But the world was a trap. Bloodhounds followed their scent. Patrols hunted them through the night. When caught, the punishments defied imagination. Broken bones, iron cages, public torture. Yet for everyone captured, another tried again. For every life lost in the swamps, another song rose in the fields. Harriet Tubman once said she freed 1,000 slaves and could have freed 1,000 more if only they had known they were slaves. The courage it took to run was greater than the cruelty that tried to stop them. Freedom, when it finally came, did not erase the scars. The same prisons that once held runaways became the foundations of new ones. The same bloodhounds found new work under different names. The plantations may have vanished from maps, but the echoes of their cruelty still lingered in the air, in the land, in the generations that followed. The soil remembers. The trees remember. And history, if we listen closely enough, remembers too, because in the end, those fields were more than places of labor. They were arenas of human survival. Every sunrise faced, every song sung, every breath drawn against the odds was an act of resistance. The people who lived through that nightmare carried something unbreakable inside them, something that even chains could not destroy. So when someone says, "You wouldn't last a day on a cotton plantation," they are right. Because no one was meant to. It was not work. It was suffering transformed into profit. It was cruelty disguised as civilization. Solomon Northup said, "There may be humane masters, but there is no slave who would not rather be free." No kindness can make chains bearable. History does not forget. It waits, it watches. And through the stories of those who lived, it still speaks. The fields are silent now, but the wind that moves through the South still carries their voices, soft, unyielding, eternal. The voices of endurance, the voices of survival, the voices that remind the world freedom is never free, and forgetting is the first step toward losing it again.